Happy Monday, Unhidden Voices family. It is Amina. Before I start talking about episode 5, I have to do a special shout out to my grandson, baby Zachariah. Well, he's not a baby anymore, he is 5 years old. And so happy 5th birthday, Zachariah. Grandma loves you with all my heart and soul. This episode is a very special episode because I got a chance to sit down with a colleague of mine, Dr. Malika Hollinside, and she and I really started engaging and talking after George Floyd's murder and talking about the impact of his death on each of us and on our families and on our profession, on our work as teachers, as educators, as folks who train future teachers. And she actually suggested that I speak with her best friend, Carmen. So this is Carmen, Malika, and Amina, just 3 sisters sitting down at the table talking about our experiences. And it is a really powerful, very healing conversation. I invite you to take part into it, listen to it, learn from it, and please amplify and feel free to share your thoughts and your comments with us. And looking forward to listening and learning with you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Malika. I'm really honored to be a part of this podcast. I'm an educator. I've been an educator for a long time on both the high school level and higher education level. And I'm just so honored to be here with my best friend in the whole world who can take it from here, Miss Carmen Johnston.
Hi, my name is Carmen Johnston, and like Malika, I am also an educator, and I have been involved with education and youth development and community work pretty much my whole adult life. And I currently teach English at Chabot College in Hayward, California. And I'm super excited to be on this podcast with Amina and with my best friend, oldest friend, Malika Hollinside.
So you both have been friends. Can you talk about how long you've known each other and how you became friends?
So we're going to have to go all the way back probably to 1986, South Bay, Sunnyvale to be exact, in the heart of the Silicon Valley, before it was the Silicon Valley. Carmen, I hope I tell this right. You correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, but it all started back in the day, 1986, South Bay, Sunnyvale, Peterson Middle School. Was it junior high or middle school?
It was junior high.
Peterson Junior High.
We had 9th graders there.
Yes, it was 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. And I was in 9th grade. And Carmen and our other best friend, Jolyn, were in 8th grade. And we bonded, I don't know if I should say it, we bonded over Wiener Schnitzel and dancing. We became a crew early. We performed at talent shows together, and you know, those were some of our earliest memories coming together, is hanging out in the parking lot, dancing after school, and yeah, it started a great friendship way back in the day.
So you're both dancers?
Yeah. We love to dance. Malika's a really good dancer. I think I'm over age. I'm the one that kind of
I can do the WAP. So. I can do any dance up until like 1985 or 86. The WAP, the Smurf, you know, after that.
Back when there were dances. I want to just add one thing about, just to add about our origin story. Is what I think is really special is just that we grew up in the South Bay, which didn't have a lot of Black people. So in our junior high, there was probably, I don't know, Malika, I mean, less than 20 Black people, we'll say, at our junior high school of like, I don't know, 1,000 students or so. It was, you know, the fact that we all met each other and liked each other and have stayed friends for so long, I think just so fantastic. And because, you know, just, I don't know, just something about that, like just having such a small pool, and that we all really just, you know, like each other and have stayed friends for so long. Like Malika said, we have another best friend, Jolyn Johnston, and she lives in Belgium, actually. She's a scientist.
Wow. Wonderful. So, I want to stop and bring us current to ask you, okay, so how are you? Like, how are you doing, and how are your families? Like, how are you doing? So, Malika, do you want to start, and then?
The past few months have been emotionally exhausting and enlightening and inspiring and infuriating and all of the above. Right now, I've been in a state of kind of limbo. A lot of my focus has been on helping my children, who are all adults now, explore and go through their own pain and reactions to the state of the country and the state of the world right now. So it's almost like reliving the pain that I went through as a young person navigating, a racist country, except it's 10 times worse because I'm hearing it through the eyes of my children now. And it's been really heavy and really deep.
So how are you managing to do that?
A lot of communication every day. My children choose to express themselves on social media. And, a lot of times I'm seeing how much fire is in my children, which is not a surprise knowing who I am, but I haven't forced the struggle upon them. I kind of feel like I wanted them to find their own way in their own place in it, and didn't raise them to be radicals or raise them to be revolutionaries. And now I'm seeing, what they have just inherently within them. So I'm kind of helping guide them through that and being a mediator and we have a lot of discussions. Right now, a lot of my focus is on family and making sure my family's okay.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm learning through these conversations is that our children they learn from us, even when we don't explicitly say this, like, the fight and the struggle and the revolutionary aspects of who we are. They get it because they see it every day. They see it in us, and it's in their DNA. So it's coming out. It's coming out, and because they, we have instilled it in them even without saying it, right? So Carmen, what about you? How are you doing?
Yeah, that's so true. Well, I think it's a little different because I have one daughter and she's 12, so she's a little bit younger, and she's definitely she's on like social media, on YouTube a lot, and so she's like, getting in the comment section and like arguable and trying to create her own ideas happening and her own understanding. I think because we are a small family, and like me and my husband talk a lot about what's going on, so she's heard it and she kind of asks questions or has her own comments and feelings about what's going on. So that's been good, just to like talk to her about it and try to help her understand what's happening. She's gone to a couple of protests with me, and we've actually gone to 2 protests together, and then my school did a little like very small demonstration, open mic, and she came, and she's really funny because it's always like a fight to get her to protest, but when she gets there, she has such a good time. She loves it. And then at my school, she ended up buying like a sweatshirt for the Black Student Union at Chabot, and she took home some protest time. So she definitely has that spirit in her, and I'm glad about that because I want her to stand up against injustice and be a leader. But I do think that, we're all kind of up and down. Like sometimes there's like a numbing where let's just watch whatever for hours, and just kind of check out. And then also a lot of just anger, and I feel like I try to listen to and support my husband a lot around that because he's pretty angry, and I think he's worried for us when we go out and do things and stuff. I mean, not only from COVID, but just the racism and like retaliation from white folks, So it's a scary time, but we're just all trying to support each other.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. So it must have been, yeah, it was yesterday, or no, it was the day before yesterday. And I was like, I've been getting up and trying to go for a walk, just 2 miles there and back. So 4 miles each morning.
Wow.
Everybody's still asleep. And these are my sort of like, okay. So, but I decided to put on my, I've been wearing all of these. See, this one says Black Girls Bend Magic. So that's one of the things I've been trying to do is like support, So I had this protest shirt that it says, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe all the way down. And then the center of it is George Floyd's face. Mm-hmm. And my husband was like, you're going to wear that and you're going to go out here and you're going to be walking alone, and it didn't, you know what I mean? And after Ahmaud Arbery, after all these things, it becomes a very different space of like having to be cautious and aware of the impact of like how we are perceived in public space and how that can also be like a jeopardizing for our own safety and health and safety, and the worry that people who care about us have for themselves, and that burden is a heavy burden. So I guess so this is a two-part question. One is like, how did you first learn about George Floyd? And this kind of connects to what you had just talked about a little bit, Carmen. And how has George Floyd's assassination, how has that impacted you and your family?
You gonna go first, CJ?
Yeah, if you want me to. Yeah, I'm trying to remember, like, I feel like the last few weeks have just been such a whirlwind, and I'm trying to remember, like, the moment when I heard about George Floyd. Because my husband, he keeps track of things a lot on Instagram, and I told me the video last thing when it first happened. And I think honestly, we were just kind of like, here we go again. We'll see what happens. Kind of just talked it up in a way to another death from police brutality, and feeling very discouraged that anything would come of it at all. And it was such, there was the Breonna Taylor that happened a while before, and then Ahmaud Arbery, and I feel like there was also that Amy Cooper thing that happened in the park. So it just felt like a domino effect. And, you're just like, okay, like what the F is going on? Like, it's COVID. People need to be in the house. How is racism still, so pervasive? Like, racism, stay in the house. You're sick. Like, don't come out, So we're just so just taken aback, I think, by all the events that had led up to happen with George Floyd, and then watch young people and organizers get folks out in the street and put the campaigns, the 8 Can't Wait, the 8 to Abolition out there, and just really feeling like swept up in the movement. And I think initially it was hard for me to figure out how to get, just as a mom and somebody who's not a young person. But once I was able, and then I just felt like protests were happening, finding out about them too late. So once I got on the radar, was kind of able more to organize myself to go with friends and go with my daughter. That really helped, because I think it was hard to like have all this adrenaline and anger and feelings and not be able to channel it any place. And so when, being able to get engaged and get out in the street, and then also being able to do a lot of organizing work at my college, has really helped me kind of just put all my anger into like progressive action. So that's been really helpful. And even on the campus, it's still a challenge. I think that's one of the hard things about this moment and just revolution in general, is that momentum, builds up, and okay, everyone's starting to pay attention, but then there's like this marathon of work.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. And I want to ask you a follow-up question about it, because I want to let Malika to answer the question, and then I'll come back.
The barrage of injustices, the barrage of what quote unquote Karens, and all of that add up and add up and add up. I had no idea that George Floyd was going to spark the national and then international reactions that it did. You know, it was the tipping point. And I'm still not quite sure what it was about that particular incident or his particular incident. Well, I know that it was through social media, probably Facebook, that you see a post and yet another post. And I find it very hard to watch those videos. Like, you know, it does something to my spirit. Like it really hurts me. And my mind, I remember my mind immediately going back to Rodney King, you know, and I was in my late teens, early 20s when that happened, you know, and then my mind goes back to Do the Right Thing. And Carmen knows, because, you know, we were the babies at the end of the 80s, the part of the Black Power movement, you know, and the Black Student Union movement. So we were very blessed to, in high school, have been exposed to, you know, injustices and you know, just we developed, I think, a spirit at a very young age of being radical against injustice in America and seeking out our true history. So my mind automatically started playing through all of these experiences that I had seen in my own lifetime. And to tell you the truth, instead of wanting to immediately go out there and join a protest and join, you know, the struggle as I had in the past, my mind went to a different place this time. This time, my mind went to, okay, this is a spiritual battle that we're fighting right now. Like, you know, I don't see automatically, I didn't see how we as a people are really going to change the evil that is inherent in so many thousands upon thousands of people in this country and throughout the world, you know, if we're not fighting spiritually, you know. So for a long time, at the beginning of you know, right after George Floyd was murdered, I started trying to really manifest what spirit is it going to take us to fight this on a whole different realm. And then it brought me back to, you know, hundreds of years of slavery and the prayers. I started meditating on what prayers must have been taking place for all of those years of the Africans who were enslaved to overthrow their slave masters. You know what, and what type of spiritual rebellion was taking place in that period of time, because I found myself wanting to connect to that, to connect to the spirit of rebellion of our ancestors as a means of turning this situation around, because I felt completely discouraged that Americans are going to change, you know, via traditional methods, via anything other than, okay, we're gonna fight this on a spiritual level, because obviously, you know, that's what it's going to take for us to deal with y'all one-on-one, you know?
So I want to take a moment because you mentioned Rodney King and you mentioned Do the Right Thing, and I'm thinking like we have like so I wrote this piece yesterday, and it said something about, I think the title was like, did Shirley Temple have wings like mine? And my son goes like, who's Shirley Temple? You know, like, and I'm like, you don't know who Shirley Temple is, right? We're talking to, hopefully 18 to 24-year-olds might watch this video, right? So take them back to when you were, you know, 18 to 24 and you saw Rodney King, right? That experience of like what that meant for you, and then bringing it to current of like, how does having 20 years of knowing that Black people are being beaten by the police and nothing happening transition you to focusing on a spiritual fight? Because I think that's important for people to understand from you.
Carmen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now I'm working on a young adult novel about, basically based on me, Malika, and Jolin's life, loosely based on our life growing up in the 90s as Black girls down in the South Bay. And I'm very fascinated by the 90s because I don't know. It's when I grew up in, the late 80s and 90s. But yeah, I'm just fascinated by that moment because I think it's so interesting, like being this group of people that are coming out of the women's movement and the civil rights movement and what the environment was like, what the conditions were like that kind of propelled us to be the people that we are today, the Black women that we are today. And so thinking back to the moment, you had the Rodney King happen, there were a couple of other things that were happening in that moment. One was there was this huge case that actually stemmed from some events that happened where we grew up with Denny's, because Denny's was forcing Black people to pay for their meals before they got their food. So there was a huge lawsuit with the NAACP because of that. So, and then you also had the OJ case. So it's like the first kind of rich Black man that was able to use the system to get himself off. So it was all these things that were happening, right, in this time period where it was supposed to be over. We were supposed to be post-racial and civil rights and these things, but there were these instances that were really showing us that the fight wasn't over. And we didn't have social media then. We didn't have the type of training and organization that young folks have now, right? We didn't have like the youth leadership programs that were focused on social justice and people of color, and just not even that language. I mean, I think a lot about growing up in a time where there wasn't an idea of culturally relevant pedagogy and all the racism that we experienced in the K-12 system. So I think that all those conditions really create a certain type of flavor to the moment. And so when Rodney King happened, you know, it was definitely outrage. And I remember actually back east at Hampton University, so people were upset, but it wasn't like how it is now, where like one thing can happen in one place and it explodes everywhere. I think the explosion of protests really was focused on LA and those LA riots. There wasn't a lot of, I mean, people, you know, showed out, but not like they're doing now. So, and I think it's just the power of social media. You know, it's just so powerful to unite and connect people and mobilize people, inform people. I mean, just that you can go on, you know, Twitter or Instagram and just even put a link to an article or a video. Like, those weren't the tools that we had in the 90s. So we weren't able to fight at the scale that folks are able to fight now, but we did figure out ways to fight. And I think one of the big places we took the fight was to education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you know, going back to like that time period, the Do the Right Thing time period, Spike Lee and his movies, you know, they guided our generation. You know, in 1989, it was Yusuf Hawkins who was killed in Bensonhurst in New York City, and you know, that sparked an awakening amongst like the hip hop community. The music was everything, and the music was a reflection of that time, of what we were feeling. Public Enemy, you know, and X-Clan and all these radical groups that started as a result, you know, the music was everything to us, and it taught us at KRS-One, you know, it had such an impact on us as young people, you know. And going back to Do the Right Thing with Radio Raheem, you know, it was the exact depiction of a Black man who was murdered at the hands of New York City police senselessly, you know, for no reason, over music. And so it really holds true and speaks true, you know, to this day. I think, speaking for myself, I know that my spirit wanted to feel a taste of that, the 60s and 70s Black Power movement. I wanted to connect to that because I felt like through most of the 80s, you know, it was kind of happy-go-lucky. You know, yes, we were entering the crack epidemic, you know, but it was the Cosby Show kind of era, you know, and I know that, you know, I wanted to really have a connection with that, the struggle for the people, you know, and that that was my avenue, specifically Rodney King. I was at Cal Poly at the time, and I was with a lot of my, fellow peers and classmates, and we, participated in our own way. And throughout then, just like Carmen had mentioned, I know a lot of people went into education as a result of that. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that 10, 20 years down the line, the young people who will have experienced or who are experiencing what we're going through right now will also choose education, because that's where it all starts. I mean, that's where we can reach thousands upon thousands of people and hopefully make a change. But it starts with history. It starts with retelling our history the way that we know we need to tell it, and decolonizing our curriculum. And that's a whole other conversation, or that's a whole segue, but that's where it meant for me.
So I want to touch on a couple of things, because Carmen, you said culturally responsive pedagogy or instruction, and I think that's a term that like the average person might not know what you mean. So can you please define that for us and tell us what that looks like? And also for Malika, I want you to explain what you mean by a spiritual fight, and what does a spiritual fight look like for an educator? So these are different questions for each of you, but if you can each answer those, I'd appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I think about culturally relevant pedagogy, and you guys are like the doctorates in education, so you probably have, a better definition. I feel like what it is kind of in the words, right? It's teaching in a way that connects to who your students are, right? So that you're not, if you have an all Black class, you're not teaching, the victor side of history or the white people side of history, for lack of better language, or you're not teaching just from the classic canon in your literature class, right? You're including writers who are of color or Black or Latino or Asian, right? LGBTQ, that you have a very inclusive curriculum, that your history doesn't just show, white people conquering, but all the different ways that people of color have resisted and the contributions that they've made to the development of modern society, that it's providing an inclusive story and inclusive education. I mean, doing math that's like connecting to the students' lives, trying to make the teaching contextual. I just know, like, as a student, I just tuned out if it was boring. If it was boring and it wasn't relevant to me, I just felt like, why am I going to try so hard for something that's so so I always just wanted to make my classes fun and engaging and exciting and contextual. I wanted it to be something that was going to impact the students' lives, and not just something that somebody else decided it was important for them to learn and for them to know. I'm sure you guys could probably go so much deeper than I said.
But can you provide an example for us? So what does that look like in your English class? That's part A. And part B is like, when you talked about the activism, and do you think that the activism that your students are involved in now, is that like an outgrowth of like what you've been doing in class, or is it just like a separate, like how is it connected to their learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I'll say in my English class, for example, I tend to do like very theme-based, project-based curriculum in my class. So for example, last semester, I did a whole thing on sexism, male domination, and climate change. And so we're looking at just the intersection between like how men's perspectives of themselves has led to the degradation of the environment, right? And like what they're told to be kind of that man versus nature and all of that. So in that unit, I'm bringing in Tony Porter, who has a whole thing about the man box. We're reading Aristotle and Dante by Benjamin Sainz, who's like a Latino writer who's writing about two young boys that fall in love. So it's very diverse. It's very connected to the students. And then we read bell hooks when we were talking about feminism, you know, and then the students did their own research projects on the different threads that they wanted to explore around how male domination and sexism impact the climate movement and environmental justice. And so it's very much about students leading, students creating the knowledge, and bringing in relevant voices of color and some white people who are down and progressive and are radical, but not just, you know, E.E. Cummings or whoever I'm told are the people that I'm supposed to teach. It's really about trying to provide a curriculum that's going to help students lead and change the world. And I do think that that has had an impact. I mean, COVID's been hard as being able to organize the students from our class, but we have very active students who have been involved in, you know, one of my colleagues told me they were at a protest and they saw a former student from our learning community leading the protest, you know, so that's really exciting to me when I hear about them out in the world, you know, taking on these big challenges.
Wow, so beautiful. All right, Malika, talk about spirituality and teaching and education.
Well, you know, one thing that I have the honor and blessing to be able to do is work with young people in our own space and our own context. And that's through a nonprofit organization that I've been a part of for 10 years called Sisters of Nia. And it started 10 years ago with me and my sister, Cynthia Smith, who is the executive director. I'm the creative director. But we wanted to start an after school program for Black girls at PS7 Middle School on the campus of Sacramento High in Sacramento. And we had total control of our curriculum, total control over the activities, over the lessons, over, you know, the teachings that we were implementing with these young people. And, you know, we base our curriculum on African-centered pedagogy, which there is no separation between the spirit and education. You know, in African-centered pedagogy, the goal of life, one's purpose in life is to become closer to the Creator, you know, to become closer to God, to become more godly. And so that is integrated within every aspect of what we teach. You know, I have had numerous meetings with the girls. We now run our program via Zoom on Saturdays. We don't meet in person anymore, obviously. But more recently, as the discussions have turned towards George Floyd, and I'm helping sixth graders, I'm doing the sixth grade group right now. So I have 12 sixth grade sisters who I am trying to help communicate, give them a platform and a voice to express, you know, how they've been feeling through the past few months. And it's fascinating, you know, what's going on in their minds. But, you know, one thing that we impart upon the girls is that our ancestors are with us. You know, our ancestors are here, that they have never gone away, and that the strength that they carried within them to help them overcome the unthinkable. You know, our lives today pale in comparison with the struggles of our ancestors 200, 300, 400 years ago. But the strength that was within them is also within us as well. And we remind them of this constantly. You know, these are areas that as an educator in a traditional high school or in a public high school, or even as an educator on the college campus, it's hard for us to transcend those boundaries. You know, we can definitely be chastised for talking about God or talking about spirit with young people. Mm-hmm. And I understand, you know, obviously we understand the conflicts inherent in bringing religion into the school, but this is spirituality. This isn't religion. You know, this is not, you know, me appealing to Jesus Christ or Allah or, you know, Buddha. This is just talking about what I was brought up to know, which is that the ancestors have always been with us. We can call upon them. They're watching us right now. And, you know, we have a role to fulfill in the course of history, and we have a legacy to uphold as well. So the strength that it took to overcome slavery and overcome Jim Crow and to keep going and persevere and become the amazing people that we are in this country and throughout the world. We teach our youngsters that it is within you to overcome. It is within you to transcend, no matter what the obstacles are. So all of the racism that they see, all of the racism that they're bombarded with, you know, to know that if you should encounter some type of circumstance that's similar to what you're seeing, you have a channel, you have a weapon, which is, you know, within you, which is the strength of your spirit.
Wow,
Yes.
that's just I have chills up my bones.
That's Malika.
That was really beautiful. You know, recently I participated in it was Juneteenth actually, and I participated in a Juneteenth protest here in San Francisco. And the one of the speakers, well, first of all, the MC was a former student of mine, right?
Oh, nice.
Oh, so when you said that, yeah, you know that. I was like, wow, okay, that's what's up. But then secondly, one of the speakers was Mario Wood's mother. And Mario Woods was shot and killed by San Francisco police, right? And she talked about his assassination and the work. And she also talked about her great-grandmother and how her great-grandmother was an enslaved woman who picked cotton, who, you know, survived this struggle in order for us to actually be able to achieve the freedom that she didn't have. And so, Malika, when you're talking about overcoming, I'm thinking of surviving. And I heard this this Megan Bang, she's vice president of the Spencer Foundation, and I listened to her give a talk one time very recently, and she was saying that survival is a promise that we kept to our ancestors and a promise we make to our children, right? And so that is, you know, I think such a powerful idea to uphold, right? That we're upholding that promise, which kind of leads me to this next question around the role of people who want to support, like, you know, the students, the future educators, those people that they're there. Maybe maybe they're not African or African American, Black, but they want to be of help, or be of support, you know, help to resist. And what are some ways that they can do that, some concrete ways that they can help, you know, us to survive and our children to survive?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know, the more and more that I do equity work, the more it just seems like a lot of it is like personal development work. I think that people really have to work on decolonizing your mind, you know, really trying to interrogate the white supremacy that we've all internalized. And I think particularly for non-Black people of color and for white folks, really interrogating that anti-Blackness. I was talking to a white ally yesterday who was asking me, because she's doing like a program for white folks that are trying to be allies, like what would be something that, you know, I would want from white women in particular. And I talked to her just about authenticity and like real empathy and real caring for Black people, you know, not in a performative way, not in a way to like feel better about yourself, but really from the heart, like caring about somebody else and building a relationship from there. And building that relationship allows you to be able to conquer things together. I have my colleague Kristen Land and I started like this equity kind of, I guess, training at our campus, equity movement, to try to get all the instructors to have more equitable practices and policies in their classroom. her and I have just, become very close. She's like one of my best friends now. And part of it is because of the authenticity that she has shown me and her willingness to kind of fight through the challenges to stay, when things got hard and things got messy. And I think a lot of times when people work with Black people and other people of color, particularly white folks, they want things to be a certain way. They want it to be very organized and very and it's just not like that. So it's not that we're messy or disorganized. It's just that life happens and sometimes you're under-resourced and it's not perfect. And I think there's a tendency that they want things perfect. They want things like packaged in a certain way in order to get behind. I really love that book, My Grandmother's Hands. He really is getting white folks to look at that stuff and actually own like what's happening in their bodies and really trying to investigate and heal from that so that they can be true allies to people of color. I mean, of course, there's like a ton of, you can donate to a group, you could sign a petition, you could go protest, but I really do think that it's that inner work. It's that inner work that we need all allies to do. And that we need to do as Black folks too, to be allies to other people of color, because there's spots where we don't always get on board. I would say particularly around our undocumented folks and immigration. And I know that there is a lot of Black people who have come out and spoken out and have really challenged what's happening. But I think we could do a lot more there. So I think we all have a lot of work to do to unpack the white supremacy that we've all internalized.
When you're talking about the self-work and self-development, part of that also in terms of Black people and even being able to do the work with Black people is to do the work with self. Because a lot of what we are discussing is about the complex trauma that we have experienced, right? And how that is generational. And when you have to get to the point where you make a decision, like what Malika was talking about making doing the spiritual work, that's a healing, right? And then that's a long lasting, because you can be involved in a protracted struggle, if you do self-work, right? But a lot of times people don't, and then they engage in other things that are detrimental to themselves, right? And we lose a lot of our young people that way, through drug addiction, alcoholism, abuse, like all these things, mental, physical, sexual abuse, like there's things that people have to work through and they need support. Therapy is something that we don't necessarily talk about in the Black community, but we should, because mental health is crucial in order to do the work. And especially when it comes to Black educators, we just lose a lot of them, have as a result of these problems that we're talking about. The other thing is I wanted to speak to the what you talked about, Carmen, in terms of allies doing some of the work for themselves. Recently, a couple of folks had asked me if I thought that white allies should work alone, like work with each other. No, you should not. And the reality is that white supremacy has taken precedence even for allies who then think that they have the secret to like solving, they're the experts, right, on like, anti-racism, anti-Blackness. And this is one of the reasons why I asked Malika to be involved in this conversation, because we cannot allow white people to lead in a discussion about specifically how to work with our communities and our children, right? That can't ever happen. And unfortunately, because the predominance of the educators of our children are white, they think that, hey, we've been doing this for years, ever since integration in this country. They have been educating our children and they have been failing our children, right? And so one of the things that I think is really beautiful is what you're talking about in terms of what both of you have alluded to in terms of the different ways that we can be culturally responsive, the way that we can connect to spirit, the way that we can heal. And those are the things that need to lead us in terms of the educational piece. So that is just I want to make sure we say that, like, no, don't go in that room by yourself, like, don't go in that, like, take the people with you that are like, one unapologetically, like, you need to be listening to and reading. Like, if you're going to be educating Black children, you need to be reading Black educators and have them help you, listening to those people, inviting those experts into the conversation to help you do that work. Okay.
Yeah, I think that it's a little, it's tricky, right? Because I think that white allies, like, they need a space to talk about what gets hard about being an ally, or just where they're rubbing up against their relationship. I don't want to listen to that. I don't want to listen to, like, their struggles, challenges, trying to decolonize their minds. I don't think that they should necessarily be the ones leading conversations and, like, how to teach students of color or anything like that. I totally agree with you there. I just do think that they need a space to kind of work on their stuff without us, because I feel like that has been how it has been for us, particularly as Black people, particularly as Black women, right? That we've always had to, like, coach them and listen to them and accommodate them and comfort them on their mistakes. That's work that I want them to do with each other. Like, I'll talk to the leader of that and give them some pointers, but I don't want to be in the room while they're like, oh, I tried to say hi to a Black woman and she blah, 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 blah. Like, I don't want to be the one to comfort you and help you figure out what happened there, So I do think that they need their spaces, but I agree with you when it's time to work with our children and our students, that there needs to be more, that we need to be the leaders in that conversation for sure.
So I guess what maybe the question becomes for me, and I guess this is the fear for me, is in the reality, I feel like they already have those spaces and they failed. Those spaces are not, those spaces are toxic spaces because of exactly what you just talked about. Because there's spaces where white fragility reign, right?
Right.
Like, okay, like, I can be, like, if we were like flies on the wall in that room, we would hear a lot of that, like, because we hear, being a person who's, like, maybe a lot of times I am the only Black person in the room. So a lot of times I do hear that. And a lot of times I have to check that, because I think also because I have a doctorate degree, or, I've learned how to make myself palatable to white people. So therefore, a lot of times they would think, like, they could say stuff that you shouldn't really be saying. You shouldn't even be thinking it, but then you think, like, you could say it, right?
Right.
So I've heard it, and I've also had a lot of people who are real white allies of mine tell me, like, okay, these are the kind of conversations that we have. You're not in the room. And so that's why I say, like, I don't necessarily, when it's like, yeah, you're going to have your room, you're going to have that space, you're going to have those conversations, you've been having those conversations. But when we're talking about how to actually decolonize your mind and decolonize the curriculum and, how to be anti-Black, you can't have that conversation with a bunch of white people talking to white people about being anti-Black, because they just don't know how.
Well, I think there's skilled people that do know how to hold those spaces. I mean, I don't know if it should just be any old random white person that's, like, convening, some white allies group. But I mean, Jane Elliott, right? Like, she's total badass. She don't play with white people. Like, I think there are some white people out there that can interrupt the white supremacy, that can challenge white people on their stuff, and aren't going to let white fragility just keep running. Like, there are, of course, people that lead those groups or in conversations that aren't interrupting the white supremacy, and that is super problematic. That's very problematic. And I think there's some people that can manage it, and can really do it well. And it's hard, right? I think all this stuff is, like, super messy, and people need a lot of different things in this moment, right? And it's challenging to kind of figure out like what's going to work for who, where, to get people where it is that we need them to go.
I think one thing that I mentioned at one point, I forget what arena of speaking I was in when I asked this question, but it was in reference to, okay, I'm sure we've all gone to conferences, you know, we're all in education and we know the reality of the demographics of education on a higher education level, on a, you know, K-12 education level. Just the fact that the Black presence in education is so marginalized. And in one of the conferences that I was in, I was presenting to probably a couple hundred predominantly white participants. I forget what conference it was, but I asked the question, if this paradigm was shifted. So for example, if you were one of, let's say, 3 or 4 other white folks in a room full of 200 Black folks, how comfortable would you feel, right? And I let that marinate for a second, you know? And, you know, I could tell that there was discomfort, you know, or maybe, oh, I've never even thought about it like that. But that's problematic in and of itself. You know, the fact that, you know, you assume that I'm comfortable, you know, every time I'm in a room with 200 of y'all, you know, because that's just the way it is in education. Right. But you have very rarely stopped to think, what would your comfort level be if the script was flipped and if you all of a sudden, and I wonder if having that experience would build up the empathy, you know, to a certain extent of what we have to go through, you know, in the professional realms. And not that that's, you know, that's only one part of, you know, 5 million things that could help the situation. But, you know, that's one thing that often sticks in my mind as being one of the few, you know, people of the global majority in this profession. You know, I don't think a lot of people think about what if the paradigm shifted, how would they feel to be in our shoes, you know, in this profession.
Yeah, I guess that, okay, so then that leads, I guess, to one of my last 2 questions. And this question kind of harkens back to what you were saying, Carmen, and what you're saying, Malika, because I wonder, when we think about expertise in anti-Blackness, right, and addressing sort of the ongoing historical nature and the systematicity of this entrenched, you know, anti-Black hate that is affecting our children, and we think of who we need to have in that, you know, conversation, and how we can, like, what is our role as educators and as Black women in doing that work? What is the role of people who are aligned with us? And do you think that, like the, you know, the experts that you have spoken of, do you think they should take the lead in that conversation, or do you think they should, you know, kind of allow Black voices to take the lead?
I don't think that they should take, I mean, I guess what I was talking about earlier was more on the like personal development piece, on like doing that inner work so that you can challenge white supremacy in these institutions. I don't think that they should be leading those conversations unless they are like hella down, you know, like down, like super down.
Is there a credential for that, CJ? Is there a credential for that? The hella down credential.
I think I should be the one to approve of it too. I don't think any
yeah, so how do you get the hella down
credential? A panel of like the radicalist Black people. Can
I get one?
You can do it, exactly.
It's called the HDC. Hella down.
Can we get a hella down shirt? I just want one of those. Maybe well,
I want to say, you know, what happens, and you know, my work that I did on Black teacher retention, you know, I interviewed a lot of people and a lot of Black educators, and you know, one thing that was mentioned over and over again is the fatigue, you know, that comes with having to be the savior, having, oh, you're the one who has to do the discussion, or you're the one who has to lead the professional development or whatnot. That's a heavy burden. We already dealing with the burden, and so now for us to have to teach y'all, in addition to us trying to save our own families and save our own communities and save our own people, it's a heavy burden. So but it's problematic because who else is going to do it then, but I wanted to say that, what's important, what I think it's important that white folks or white educators take a part in is understanding that, this is an issue of restoring humanity to people, this is beyond civil rights. And I have to give a nod to my man who just wrote a thesis on human rights. So big up Tyrone Ralph, big up Lakem Allah for your work that you did. But again, when we look at what's taking place historically or presently, the capacity for such evil, can only come from people who have been robbed of their humanity.
That's right.
Somewhere along the line, somewhere wrong, because the oppressed, we certainly got our shit. We got a lot of stuff to deal with, but the virtue of being oppressed does not make one dehumanized. The virtue of being an oppressor makes you dehumanized. And Freire says that, it is to the oppressed, it is our task to restore humanity, which is a huge burden. But one thing that I would love to impart, particularly for K-12 educator, for any educator, not just a K-12 educator, but any educator, is to value the teaching of humanity as much as we value teaching the ABCs, as much as we value teaching fractions, as much as we value teaching, science or anything else, what does it mean to have ethics? What does it mean to have morals? What does it mean to care about other people, to have empathy for others, where are our courses where teachers are, where are the credentials in that? We need to, and this is what I think the role of white educators can be, as they are working on themselves, because, we know that has to happen, but they have to not only in culturally responsive pedagogy be very versed in that, but also do they understand, do you understand what it is to be a human being who has your humanity intact? Can you identify the cases in history where people did not have their humanity intact, who were dehumanized? Because we could simplify this. Let's go back to, pre-colonized Africa, or before the conquistadors came in, pillaged and destroyed South America. Let's talk about what were instances in history where mankind lost in their humanity. And because of that, we're able to kill, rape, commit genocide, and do all of the same things that we see taking place. And we can see it in the eyes of those policemen today who are kneeling on people's necks until they can't breathe anymore. And we see it in the eyes of women waving their guns crazy in front of their house because they think somebody's going to, in the Karens who don't want a brown sister to sit in the park with her, I see the dehumanity, and we have to stop that in the classroom. Like, we have to address it as much as we address any of the other or more than any of the content matter. What is more important than being a good human being?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's so true.
I got a little work.
No, it's true. It's true. I mean, I think that's what the work is. That's exactly what the work is trying to help people get back in touch with what it means to be human, and to make our institutions more humane, right? To come up with practices to deconstruct everything so that we have these more human approaches to how we deal with students and how we deal with each other. That's exactly what it is. And I think that it's not only just, the role of being the oppressor, but it's also the system, right? The system, the capitalism, the push on productivity and capital, and just all of that. There's all these conditions that have created a situation where it's very hard for each of us in some ways to hold on to our humanity.
But if young
I just also wanted to,
go ahead.
no, I was just going to add just briefly to that. I think right now, because things are so accessible, like there really isn't any reason for a white person to like not know something. You know, like there's hella books. Black people have done so much scholarship on so many different issues and so many different angles to every single issue, and writers of color. There's so much out there. There's podcasts. There's podcasts about, you can watch this podcast.
Yes.
Listen to this podcast and learn a lot. You know, there are little video snippets of things. Like there's just no reason. There's articles. There's just like things you can find, read. Medium is so great, right? They'll be like 4-minute read. You know, like there's so many.
It tells you how long it'll take you
there
to educate yourself, literally. 5 minutes.
Exactly. Like it's not long at all. You know, like you actually don't even have to talk to a Black person or a person of color. Like you don't have to say, oh, tell me about your hair. No, guess what? There's videos that explain my hair. You don't need to touch me to know that. So I think people need to just take advantage of this time where we have all this technology that you can just get things at a touch of a button. You know, don't ask me. Ask Google. Google will tell you everything you need to know. Not everything, but a lot.
Everything. Malika, what were you gonna say?
Oh man, I think I lost it. I forgot.
I'm sorry. You were talking about the youth.
I was getting ready to go on Google and touch. What happens if you ask a Black person, can I touch their hair? I want to know how many Google responses there are to that.
And how many 5-minute reads about it? I just literally read a Medium post about Black women's hair, just like yesterday or the day before. So it's definitely. I think this has been phenomenal, and I really, really appreciate both of you. Just the spirit and everything that you're saying, and the work and the encouragement. And I don't see how anyone could listen to this and not at least have, the recognition that the focus has to be on the rehumanization of the self, right? And so I love that. I love the idea of like the self-work, the self-education, and to relieve the burden. I think that's so important, and so, because we're tired. You know what I mean? It's exhausting. This is exhausting. So I feel so motivated by the energy that you both brought, and the hope that you bring, because it kind of is like, okay, there's things we can do. All of us is not, every group, there's something every person can do, and we can all contribute, so that we can make this society a better place, make this world a better place.